coffee, I take tea, my dear. I like my toast done on one side. You can hear it in my accent when I talk. I'm an Englishman in New York. See me walking down Fifth Avenue, walking cane here at my side. You take it everywhere I walk. I'm an Englishman in New York, in New York, in New York, in New York.
So the theme for the story, The Day the Dancers Came, is basically about loneliness, which can also be related wherein homesickness and the fear of growing alone in a foreign country can also be related. In the story, two elderly men named Phil and Tony, who have lived in the United States, specifically in Chicago, have encountered a dismaying story that it was not a happy ending tale of the hardworking people abroad, but rather it shows a feel of emptiness and sadness in the hearts of the two protagonists. So in the story, Phil's excitement on the arrival of the Filipino dancers somehow showcased his longing for his family and loved ones back in the Philippines, because it is clear that he really misses his family back home in the Philippines, and somehow it shows that he also admitted that he no longer has contacts with them. That's why he was very excited to meet the Filipino dancers, because somehow he can, in that way, he will be able to somehow see his family through the Filipino dancers. Phil can also be described or likened to it's like a square peg in a round hole, because in the story, even though he certainly did not fit in the foreign culture, because through the years that he had stayed in the United States or Chicago, he never really settled with anyone or with someone. So adding to that, Phil was also in denial of Tony's situation, because he was obviously not ready to grow old alone in a foreign country, because although he knows that Tony will soon die, but still he is in denial. So on the other hand, Tony had become cynical in everything. He became disillusioned because of the sickness, because unlike Phil, he really accepted the fact that soon he will, So on the other hand, Tony was cynical about everything. He was disillusioned because of the sickness, because unlike Phil, he knew that he was going to die, but however, he tried to hide his disappointment. If you really dig deeper and analyze every statement in the story, it clearly shows the unhappy life of people abroad who, when they were still young, had dreamed of going or have dreamed of searching for greener pastures. Eventually, when they grow old, they have come to realize that it is still, it is better to stay in the Philippines rather than to migrate or be in another country with a different culture, which they have grown up with when they were still young. So basically, when you analyze the story, the notion of really working abroad is still very observable in the generation today. So young people today will resort to leaving Philippines and go or migrate or work outside the country, believing that they have better future when they would not stay here in the Philippines. However, they do not realize that they also have to make sacrifices, and that includes being in a faraway place, away from their families and loved ones, as well as adapting to a new culture outside the country. But eventually, in the end, they will realize that indeed it is really better to stay in the Philippines their loved ones and families with them, rather than be in another country alone and grow old there without having someone to take care of them.
Now, I'm going to give you the summary of our story. So, the setting of the story, the day the dancers came, is in Chicago. And this story is about two old guys. The main characters are Phil and Tony. Phil is a former corporal of the US Army and he's 50 years old now and he lives with another old man, which is Tony, but is a few years younger than him. Now, Tony has a disease and Tony has this case in his skin, which is his skin is peeling off and leaves white marks. And Tony is bedridden, and he believes that he has cancer. So, what the story starts at on a snowy morning, which Phil saw the snow, and he was happy because he thought that the Filipino dancers that will come there will finally see snow. And then Tony was Phil had a plan of inviting the dancers to their apartment to eat, and he also planned to tour them in Chicago. But then Tony disapproved in his plan because he thought that they are old and they will not listen to an old person. But Phil still wanted to entertain them. But still Tony said to them that to Phil that he will not be entertained by the dancers because they will just think of him as a crazy old man. Again, that they will think of him as a normal old person, which they should avoid. Phil didn't listen to the comments of Tony's, and he still wanted to see the dancers, invite them. So he went to where the dancers stay, which is in Hamilton. Hotel in Hamilton in Chicago. And when Phil arrived at the Hamilton, he saw that there are many Filipino dancers there. He thought that the hotel was fully occupied by the dancers. So when Phil was there, he thought how he would introduce himself, what will he say to the dancers to persuade them to go to their apartment. But then he was too shy to talk to them. He did not have the confidence to tell them. So, but he still tried to invite them. He talked to some dancers, but then the dancers refused his offer and Phil thought that maybe the dancers were told not to entertain people like that. So then Phil gave up and went home. As he went back home, he slept for a while. He did not want to sleep, but then he can't fight the tiredness of his body, so he slept. And then he dreamed that Phil was there. They were talking about floating. Then Tony was there, and they were talking about how to afloat. Tony explained how to afloat. But then Phil insisted to talk about the dancers. So they talked about the dancers and how they treated Phil there. Then Phil woke up and realized that it was just a dream. Then he woke up at past 5 and the theater dance will start at 8. And he had a plan. He has a recording, tape recorder, and he decided to bring the tape recorder at the theater to record the dance and the voices of the dancers. So then, from the theater, Phil went home and he knew that Tony was there. And he did not want to cause any ruckus, or he did not want to cause any disturbance to Tony, so he went to the living room. And so he listened to the tape and he lowered down the volume. As But then Tony still heard about it, then Tony shouted, turn that off. Then as he turned the picture of the memories, it was still there, he thought about the dancers. Then Tony shouted across the room, oh no, which made him feel that Tony went to the doctor, and he asked Tony that what did the doctor tell him. And then in the story, it turned out that all of the happenings was just recorded in the tape recorder, and Phil just kept on winding and playing the tape. Then suddenly, as he wanted to play the tape, he accidentally pressed the eraser, then erased the tape recorder. And Phil got very sad because of that accident.
So I'm going to discuss about the author of the story The Day the Dancers Came, who is Bienvinido Santos. Bienvinido Santos received numerous honors and awards, namely the Republic Cultural Heritage Award in 1965, the Doctor of Letters and Humanities from the University of the Philippines, the National Endowment of the Arts Award and the American Book Award, and the Southeast Asia Writer Award. Although he was more widely known as a short story writer, he was also a poet. His 2 volumes of poetry are the Wounded Stag 50 Poems in 1956 and Distances in Time Selected Poems in 1982. So in the story, The Day the Dancers Came, the literary techniques used by the author, Bienvenido Santos, are imagery, dramatic visualization, and flash forward. So, imagery is forming mental images of a story using descriptive words and especially making use of the human senses. So, in the story, the author clearly describes the scene or the setting of the story for the readers to really picture out what is happening in the story. Second literary technique used by the author is dramatic visualization. Dramatic visualization is representing an object or a character with plenty of descriptive words, mimetically rendering gestures and dialogue to make the scene more visual to the audience. So, the 2 characters in the story, who are Phil and Tony, are described by the author. For us, the two characters of the story, who are Tony and Phil, are clearly described by the author. For us to picture out their appearances. The third literary technique used by the author is flash forward. Flash forward is a literary technique that means something. Flash forwards are often used to represent a scene that might happen or occur in the future. So in the story, Phil was imagining what would have the dancers told their fellow Filipinos in the Philippines if he was able to welcome them in
the main theme that our group has come to a conclusion is that it is about fear and loneliness. So it can also be related to the emotional dilemma or confusion, or basically the struggles of the author. So the poem simply revolves in the idiom which states that living in a goldfish bowl, which simply means that a person is confined or limited to a certain situation, place, or relationship. So the poem simply revolves in the idiom which states that living in a goldfish bowl, which simply means that a person is confined or limited or limited to a certain situation, place, or relationship. So the author of the poem somehow likened the protagonist to the goldfish inside the clear plastic bag. So the author of the poem likened the protagonist to the goldfish, wherein just like the goldfish, which is confined in a clear plastic bag, the protagonist is somehow confined or trapped in a certain situation or relationship. So in the poem, the protagonist is somehow perceived as someone who has unfulfilled dreams and desires. The protagonist in the poem is perceived to have unfulfilled dreams or desires, but he or she wanted to get out of the box. However, he or she feared what might happen of the action that he or she was going to do. And also, the protagonist is also scared of the repercussions that might happen because of his or her certain actions. So in the poem, it also shows that the protagonist wanted another person or other persons to initiate the action in order to change the current situation that he or she is in. Although the protagonist wanted the other person or another person to make the first move, however, the protagonist do not know exactly what to do or what to react if that certain person will initiate the first move. Thus, in the end, the protagonist is not able to voice out her desires, making the protagonist stagnant or restrained in a certain situation, just like the goldfish in the plastic bag. In the Filipino context, the poem somehow shows the reality, or make us realize the reality of Pinoys, wherein we are scared or we are afraid to hurt others. In reality, we Filipinos cannot frankly state what we truly feel, our desires, our dreams, because of the fear that we might hurt other people's feelings. Filipinos are said to be passive in nature. Which means that we wait for others to make the first action before we actually act. And sometimes we even prefer to just suffer in silence and not to voice out what we really feel. Because, as what I stated before, because we are scared of what the other person concerned in that situation would feel.
Dream of Goldfish. Naya Valdellon uses the literary techniques, flash forwards, metaphor, and free verse. First is flash forwards. Flash forwards are used to represent events that might happen or might occur in the future. So in the story, the main character was imagining what story the character in the story the main character was imagining what would have happened if he would poke the plastic bag containing the goldfish. The second literary technique is free verse. So the poem is in free verse because it does not have any rhyme in it. Then poem is in free verse because in each line there is no definite numbers of words present, and it is free from the rhyme. The third literary technique is metaphor, which is comparing two unlike things. So the author compared the goldfish to a sun. I'm going to talk about the author of Dream of Goldfish, who is Naya Valdellon. So, Naya Valdellon teaches at Ateneo de Manila University. She was a fellow for poetry in 2002 Dumaguete National Writers Workshop and was the first winner of the Maningning Miklat Poetry Prize in 2004. She won first prize for poetry in the Palanga.